The Fix Your Fatigue podcast. Whether you can't get out of bed in the morning, your energy crashes throughout the day, or you're a biohacker looking to optimize your energy, productivity, and focus, this podcast is for you. I am Dr. Evan Hirsch, and I will be your host on your journey to resolving fatigue and optimizing your energy. And we'll be interviewing some of the top leaders in the world on fatigue resolution. Welcome. Today. Happy Thursday. Very excited to be chatting with you today and doing our monthly Facebook Live Q&A. So just a quick brief announcement. You may see some changes to our name and some of our branding. We are rebranding from Fix Your Fatigue to EnergyMD, Energy for Leaders, because what the world needs right now is stronger, more effective, more energetic leaders. And whether you're leading your government, your business, your family, or your community, because we're all leaders in some way, you need more energy. And so that's kind of where we're moving towards. And I really like EnergyMD. It's more of a focus on the energetic, on where we want to go, as opposed to being in the fatigue. And fixing is great, but it's too much of a masculine, hard and fast word for me now in my personal evolution as I'm traveling through working on my emotions, working on my mental health, in addition to all of the physical things that that we work on in the program. So also it brings in the MD, since we are science backed and we are proven clinically. So I think that that's really helpful for moving forward. So let's go ahead and dive into our questions. But first, if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment below and say, hey, tell us where you're from. I'm always excited to see and hear about where people are from. So excited to see all of you today. All right, let's go ahead and jump on in. So I'm going to do this chronologically, so based off the first person who submitted their responses. And then if we have time at the end, I will open this up for questions in the Facebook group, if there are any, and we will end at 5 o'clock, so an hour from now. So the first person is Joanie, who submitted her question on March 18th. She said, how do you treat adrenal issues when your cortisol is very low in the morning, like negative, very high at night, like twice the Cushing's amount? Been suffering for 20 plus years, tried numerous adaptogenic herbs, vitamins. At the moment, can only sleep 4 hours and then I wake no matter when I go to bed or what I take. I have to have Ambien, Benadryl, melatonin, weed, or something to fall asleep at night. And so your energy is a 3 out of 10, with 10 being ideal energy. And let's see. There's some premenstrual stuff. You're just sharing some of this previous history. Thank you for that. Chronic pain from trigeminal neuralgia, and then some of the supplements that you're taking, and then some of the medications that you're taking. Still figuring out which causes you have, but you know you've got some testosterone deficiency, vitamin D, iron, water, good food, celiac, yep, sinus, dental, inhaled antigens, electromagnetic fields, long-term damage from hydrocephalus. Okay. So you're absolutely right that you want to be looking at some adrenal support. So we find that we get more people to sleep at night by giving them things in the morning than we do by actually giving them anything at night. And so when I say that, we're talking about adrenals, mitochondrial support, and thyroid support. So it's never just one thing. Oftentimes, as you add in some additional things, you are going to start to sleep better. But finding the ideal adrenal support for you is going to be a bit of a process. And without knowing the different ones that you've tried, you said you've tried a lot of different adaptogenic herbs. I can't really comment on versus the things you've tried, but I will do my best. So in terms of adrenal support, if you are more sensitive or if you do feel worse when you're taking adrenal support, it's usually because you need thyroid support first, okay? And like I said, the adrenals, the thyroid, and the mitochondria, we call those the big three in the program because they really shift your energy really significantly. And so with the thyroid, you're gonna want to make the thyroid work better by taking some vitamins or minerals some herbs, and then potentially use a thyroid glandular. But that's like the big question that I have is, if you feel worse when you're taking adrenal adaptogens or adaptogenic herbs in general, which work on other hormones as well, then it's very likely that you need to focus more on the thyroid. Now, if your cortisol, the whole issue with your circadian rhythm is that your adrenals, mitochondria, and thyroid are not regulating your circadian rhythm appropriately. So instead of having, really good energy in the morning, your cortisol is supposed to start to rise at around midnight. It peaks at around 6 a.m. and then slowly throughout the day it comes down. When you've got adrenal gland dysfunction, you're doing this, which basically means during the day you're like awake, crash, awake, crash, awake, crash. And then guess what happens at night? Awake, crash, awake, crash, awake, crash. So you can't sleep at night, right? So once you fix that circadian rhythm by boosting your adrenals, your mitochondria, and your thyroid, B12, iron in the morning can also help, but don't take iron with your thyroid. Those things can really be helpful. Now, the other thing that you didn't mention as a potential cause, but you have trigeminal neuralgia, you probably have an infection. We see a tremendous amount of people who have a mold plus an infection or two when you have chronic fatigue or low energy. And it really takes working on those things and removing them out of the body, because they are going to be major causes of adrenal gland dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, all the deficiencies that we talk about. So that's the other thing too, is if you can't take adrenal support, then you may have to go a different route. You may have to go to step 3 first, open up the detox pathway so you can start to remove things out of step 4. So, and this is what we do in our program, just customize it for you depending on what you need. So hopefully that is helpful for you. You did say you've tried numerous adaptogenic herbs, but you haven't said like what happened. So that would be helpful information. Hope that's helpful, Joanie. Thanks for your question. Noel, that's not a question. Let's see, what is your long hauler protocol and which brands do you use? So it depends on the individual, but the long hauler things that you want to consider are going to be high dose vitamin D. And I'll go ahead and I'll drop my our current protocol for what happens when you or what can be helpful for you in the acute and then also in the chronic. And the chronic stages where you have these persistent symptoms from the virus, then you would just you would take the large amounts of these supplements, vitamins, minerals, herbs, and you would just continue with them, ramping up on these antivirals, because that's that's one of the main reasons why people are having issues, is because they have this persistent virus. So let me just check. There's a couple of comments in here. Elizabeth says, hello, Dr. Evan and everyone. Excellent. Hello from New Zealand. And then Veronica was asking for what kind of detox herbs. So I'm not sure what question that was or where that's from. You said you have overactive thyroid. You had Graves' disease 2 years ago. How do you go about? Okay, so we'll come to those questions later. We're going to address people's we're going to address people who have submitted their questions first, and then we can come to your question later. Thank you for your submission, though, Veronica. Okay, so then coming back, so then let me go ahead and drop. And we have a more thorough, so in our program, I do go into this a bit more thoroughly, but this is a good starting place for you that may be helpful. So if you go to our pandemic Google Sheet that I just dropped in there, pandemic.fixyourfatigue.org, you can take a look, and those are the supplements that we generally will start people on. We do want them to also, here, let me go ahead and just check, double check and make sure that it has what we're interested in. So there's a number of things in here as well. So if you scroll down to the bottom where it says first sign of viral symptoms, that's kind of where you're gonna look. Part of this is, well, all of it actually, the supplements, and then adding in also the ones where it says first start of viral symptoms. And there's also some natural anticoagulants on here. So one of the things that we know from long haulers is that people's blood is clotting. And so we do want to remove that. But yeah, it's going into optimizing the immune system, optimizing the adrenal function, because one of the reasons why people are suffering from their fatigue is because their adrenals aren't functioning right, their mitochondria isn't functioning right. We want to work on vitamin C, vitamin A, quercetin, and zinc, liposomal glutathione, liposomal melatonin, colloidal silver, and then some anticoagulants like nattokinase and some fish oils. And then there's some antivirals that I have on here as well. All right, Catherine, I hope that is helpful for you. And then Lynn says, what is best to take for low iron count? So that can mean several different things. So if your ferritin is low, if your TIBC or your total iron binding capacity is high, that's actually the best marker. So if your total iron binding capacity is above 350, closer to 400, then that is going to be where that's significant for low iron. If you also look at your complete blood count, your CBC, and you're looking for your MCV, your mean corpuscular volume, that number, if it's less than 90, that indicates iron deficiency as well. Ferritin should be greater than 50. But you have to look at all those as a combination. If you're seeing all those numbers that I just said, then yes, your iron is low. Now, question is, why is your iron low? Is your iron low just because you're menstruating? Is your iron low because you've got some sort of chronic disease? Is your iron low because you're bleeding in your colon? Right? And so we want to make sure that it's not like somebody has colon cancer, and that needs to be evaluated too. Sometimes iron is low because people have infections or they have parasites that are consuming the iron. So we don't want to necessarily give somebody iron if they have these infections that we're just going to feed. It really depends on how low the iron is, would determine whether or not you're going to give somebody iron. Now, if I was going to give somebody iron, the product that I like by Designs for Health is called Ferrochel, Ferrochel. We do have that in our store, which is at store.fixyourfatigue.org. And you can register with code HIRSCH, HIRSCH. And if you use HIRSCH, HIRSCH at checkout, that'll give you free shipping for your first order, I believe, or an additional $5 off or something like that. So hopefully that is helpful for you, Lynn. And then you also said your energy is a 3 out of 10. You fatigue, feeling depressed. You're taking a multivitamin, krill oil, acetylcholine, and adrenal fatigue formula. Okay. And so what's really important to remember for all of you is that if you have low energy, there are 33 potential causes of your low energy, and that everybody who has low energy and fatigue has 20 plus of those causes. Okay, so basically what that means is that you have 20 causes of your low energy and you have to fix all of them. It's like having 20 nails in the bottom of your foot and you have to pull all of them out in order to be successful. So just taking something for adrenals isn't going to do it. Taking something for adrenals and mitochondria and thyroid, it's definitely going to help. But you have to make sure that you're also addressing if you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections like Lyme or Bartonella or Babesia or parasites or allergies or negative emotional patterns or electromagnetic frequencies, right? Fields. So you have to make sure that anything that's not in the body that's supposed to be there, that it's a deficiency that you need to boost into the body, you need to take. And then for things that are in the body that aren't supposed to be there, you have to remove those things. Okay. So that's the big message that I'm always trying to get across to folks is that it's this accumulation of toxins over your lifetime that has really put you in this situation, and you got to get them out, but you got to do it in a certain 4-step process, which I'm happy to go into. If somebody wants me to, just drop a comment into this chat in Facebook, and I will be happy to go into the EnergyMD method 4-step process. So just ask for it. All right, hope that was helpful for you, Lynn. Carol says, I was recently diagnosed with stress cardiomyopathy and esophageal spasms. I'm sorry to hear that. The cardiologists do not know exactly what causes it, and the only reason I am given is because of stress. I get chest pain about 5 times a week. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Any suggestions? So a lot of this always looks at that I like to look at is chronology. So we're seeing a lot of cardiovascular or heart issues since the pandemic. And so sometimes it comes from the virus, sometimes it comes from the vaccination. So it's important to look at the chronology to determine, okay, when did this initially start? Okay, so definitely take a look at that and see if that's the case, because we always need to know the cause in order to be able to tailor the treatment appropriately. So in terms of cardiomyopathy, that indicates that the heart is larger than it should be. And there are different kinds of cardiomyopathy, so that would also indicate would change our treatment. I'm not an expert in cardiomyopathy. So I need some more information on that. And then in terms of the esophageal spasms, oftentimes that's usually that's explained, or that's a diagnosis of exclusion, where they're like, well, we're not exactly sure what's happening. Maybe it's from the esophagus spasming, but maybe it's from the heart. They just don't know because of that particular area. I have seen this happen with people who have mold. So I did have one client years ago who had esophageal spasms, this chronic chest pain that she was having, and it did go away when we got rid of mold. So, but a lot of it has to do with, maybe it's the muscles, maybe it is has to do with the nerves in between the ribs. So that's where an exam comes into place, where if you push on the chest in certain parts and you can reproduce the pain, that means it's muscular. Okay, that means it has to do with the muscles and the nerves that are kind of in between the ribs. So that's something to look at for sure. All right, hopefully that is helpful for you, Carol. Let me just take a moment and look back in the Facebook group. Okay, so Colleen wants the 4 steps. Okay, great. So in terms of the 4 steps, this is the EnergyMD method that I've spent years developing, that has been helpful for so many people. The first step is to determine the causes that you have. Okay, so like I said, there are 33 potential causes. Everybody has 20 plus causes, and everybody has a different 20 plus causes. So Veronica, you may have causes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and Colleen may have causes 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, whatever, right? So your treatments are obviously going to be different. The other thing that's actually quite cool about looking at these causes is that 75% of these causes can be determined by symptoms alone. So signs and symptoms, which basically means when people join our program and they start going through our workbook and they look at all of their different causes just based off their symptoms, they're going to know 75%, or like 27 out of the 33 different causes, just based off of looking at their symptoms. So that's cool. And then the 25% really are the ones that you need labs for. So heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and then a stool test. And then so step 2 is about replacing the deficiencies. And so when we look at these causes, and maybe I'll share my screen so that I can share this with you guys, you can take a look. So if we take a look, share my screen. Give me just a second here. Okay, so share my screen. All right, so if you take a look, this is our workbook. Let me just make it a bit bigger. So we've got, let's jump down to the causes that we're talking about. So when we're looking at the 33 different causes, this is what we're referring to, and they can really be divided into deficiencies and toxicities. So deficiencies are these things that are not in the body that are supposed to be there, and toxicities are things in the body that are not there, or that are in the body. Toxicities are things that are in the body that aren't supposed to be there. So in step 2, we go ahead and we support these deficiencies in mindset, right? So you'd be like, wait a second, I thought you were an MD. What are you doing talking about mindset? Well, 80% of our thoughts are negative. Okay. And so it's really important that we work on our mindset. So we have a 4-step process that we go through that, which I'm happy to share if people request it. But then we're looking at adrenals, mitochondria, thyroid, sex hormones, vitamins, minerals, lifestyle habits, neurotransmitters. All of these need to be replaced first to make you as strong as possible, to make you robust, so that you can get rid of these toxicities in step 4. In step 3, we open up the detoxification pathways, and then and that's like opening up intestines and liver and kidneys and lymph and neural lymph. And then in step 4, we're removing these toxicities. Okay, but you have to set the stage, otherwise you're not going to be successful. This is why you feel worse when you're going through a program and you take an antimicrobial or you take a binder or whatever. You just haven't gone through this process of making yourself successful. You have to make yourself as robust as possible by replacing these things, and then you have to open up the detox pathways with the in step 3, and then you have to remove the toxicities. So hopefully that is helpful and that explains that. Let me know if you guys have any questions about the EnergyMD method. All right, let's come back then to next question. So Karen P says, I had a mycotoxin test done. It shows okra toxin A, citrinin, and mycophenolic acid. Will cholestyramine eliminate all of these? So cholestyramine is a binder. It is a prescription binder. It's pretty darn good. It's one of the best that we have available. However, it is also very poorly tolerated. And oftentimes, in order to make it better tolerated, you have to combine it with, you have to have it compounded, and you have to have it combined with something that tastes better, because it's generally awful tasting. So yes, cholestyramine, you have to make sure that you're no longer living in the environment. So that's very important. And then taking the cholestyramine is going to be a big help, but not just cholestyramine on its own. You have to also be taking glutathione. And then you also have to make sure that you are addressing all the other causes that you also have. Because once you start, if you think about all these causes, especially the toxins as this toxic matrix, this toxic ball, when you start to reach in, you start grabbing the mold and with the cholestyramine and you start removing it, guess what? It opens up this toxic matrix. And then the heavy metals, chemicals, infections, also start floating around, and you've got to have things on board to kind of bind those and to get rid of those as well. Okay. The other thing too is that you're not going to be as successful if you haven't spent enough time in step 3, opening up the detoxification pathways. Okay. So hopefully that is helpful for you. And there's a lot of other different binders that you can be taking as well. And so everything that we do is natural. I operate as a health coach in the online space, and I love using natural binders. So there's alcohol, there's activated charcoal, there's humic and fulvic acid. There's a number of different binders. I'm really liking some of the binders that you can take with food because it's so challenging for some folks to take binders 60 minutes away from food and supplements. And so we're having good success with that. So that is my 2 cents on your mycotoxin test. Hope that's helpful, Karen. Let me just jump back into the group and just check and see. Sure, Colleen. Yep, I can share those mindset steps. I'm going to come back to that though, and we'll come back to Veronica's other question later. Okay. So then next up is Lisa. So Lisa says, I was diagnosed with microscopic colitis last December, and I have great fatigue and daily diarrhea, which I'm aware is part of the autoimmune condition. But do you know if there's a way to heal or put into remission this condition along with the fatigue? So which interesting, Lisa, and I'm sorry that you're suffering with that. That's no fun at all. The interesting thing is that the causes of fatigue are the same as the causes of autoimmunity. And there are all these toxins that we keep talking about, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, the allergies, the negative emotional patterns, and the electromagnetic fields. Okay, so all of those things need to be addressed. All of those are triggering the immune system to react to itself abnormally. So if you think about what's normal for the immune system, excuse me, let me take a sip. When something foreign comes into the body, the immune system finds it, wraps it up, gets rid of it. Okay, that's normal, and that's inflammation. Okay, inflammation is basically the immune system reacting to something. And what happens when you get inflammation? You get pain and dysfunction. And autoimmunity is basically inflammation that's happening to the cells in your body. Okay, so it's not just that the immune system is kind of going after something, it's actually going through the cells in order to be able to get there. So there's something, a heavy metal, chemical, mold, etc., that is inside a cell or inside an organ, in this case, inside the intestines, and the immune system is attacking it. Well, the immune system wouldn't be attacking it if it didn't see something else, something that was either in that cell or something in some other part of the body that's not supposed to be there. That's one of these toxicities. So once again, the process is going to be the same. You got to get rid of the toxins, but you got to go through step 1, step 2, and step 3 in order to be able to then be successful at getting rid of step 4. Now, when you get rid of the autoimmunity, you're also going to be getting rid of the fatigue at the same time. Hopefully that is helpful for you, Lisa. All right, Maria says, do kidney problems also contribute to fatigue? Thank you. Yes, Maria, they definitely can. They definitely can. It depends on how advanced the kidney issues are. And so, the kidneys are essentially a filter in the body, and they're filtering the blood, and that's how you get the urine. And so if you have holes in your kidneys, consequently, you're not going to be absorbing what you need to. You're not going to be reabsorbing the salt that you need to. Oftentimes there's salt wasting, whether it's sodium or potassium or other minerals. And so consequently, that ends up lowering your blood pressure, and then you don't have enough blood flow to the head. So absolutely, there's a number of different reasons why having a kidney disease or kidney dysfunction would cause fatigue. Brooke's question is, how can one rest on the ground safely and be protected from disease-carrying insects such as ticks and mosquitoes without using toxins that would further compromise health? You've got Hashimotos, thyroiditis, long haulers, or long haul Epstein Barr virus, mostly in active state in recent years. And so in terms of lying down and being protected from disease, so these, ticks and mosquitoes aren't just on the ground. So I assume you're talking about going outside. So if you just go outside and you're wondering how to protect yourself, that might, I would imagine that that's probably your question. So there are some natural things that you can take. It really depends on kind of the risk also of where you are in the country. Now we do know that there's Lyme in every single country, or every single state rather. And so it's all over the place now, but you are more at risk when you are in New England. And so consequently, if you are in New England and you're in the woods, you may want to spray with permethrin, which is not the safest thing, but the risk benefit ratio might be the case where you may want to do that. The other thing is that oftentimes what you can do is you can, and there are some other, I can't remember them right now, but there are some other more natural anti-insect sprays that you can use. Long sleeves, long pants, socks, hats, all of these things are going to be really helpful to prevent any sort of stinging that you get from these. Sometimes also I will recommend, if somebody thinks that they have been stung, or they had some sort of exposure to a tick, then we may go ahead and just treat them with some of the herbs that we use to make sure that the big three, the Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia, have not come into play. And there's a number of herbs that are in each of these compounds or complexes that we use to be able to decrease their chance of actually getting some of these infections. So, and that's also what we've been recommending for during the pandemic, is that, if you are taking supplements that are boosting your immune system, that are killing viruses, you're a lot less likely to take a virus and get this virus transmitted to you or transmitted to other people, and consequently get stuck with long haulers or the persistent symptoms, in addition to the acute infection. So when you have some of these things on board just proactively, you're a lot likely to get some of these infections. And, an ideal, or I should say, an immune system is functioning the way that it's supposed to when you don't have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, allergies, negative emotional patterns, electromagnetic fields, right? So I keep on repeating that list because I want you guys to get it into your heads and into your thoughts that this is really where you need to be focused, is on figuring out whether or not you have those causes. Because when you do, with laser-like efficiency, you can actually then resolve them. Okay, so I digress. But the reality is that the immune system functions better when you don't have those things. And part of the reason why people end up with some of these chronic infections is because they have heavy metals, chemicals, and molds that hijack the immune system off into left fields. And then the infections have a party. And then all of a sudden you've got active and reactivated Epstein Barr virus. You've got Lyme, you've got some of these other things, because you can't, there's been several studies done on people who've got mold plus an infection, or mold plus Lyme, where you remove the mold and the Lyme goes away. Okay, it's not 100%, but it just goes to show that when the immune system is dysfunctional, it's not going to be as successful at getting rid of these infections. And so that's part of the work that we want to be doing, is bringing that immune system back online and making it as strong as possible. Hopefully that is helpful for you, Brooke. All right, so David is up, or Deidre, rather, sorry about that. Are there tests, blood work or other, that can indicate and or confirm one's body is suffering from fatigue? In other words, there are bodily systems not working well. So much like I said, so let me share my screen again, and I will show you this list again. All right, so if you take a look at this list, you will see that everything that's got a plus next to it can be determined just by your signs and symptoms. Okay, and you can confirm with labs if you want to, but labs are optional. So that's the 75% on this list that can be determined by symptoms alone. Okay, so 27 out of these 33. And then the minuses you can see are the ones that require some sort of lab work. So this is blood work, blood work, blood work, blood work for those. And then over here, this is a urine test for mycotoxins. This is a urine test that's provoked, and that's a urine test as well. And then the equal signs can be evaluated based off of labs or symptoms, but we do like to get a stool test when we're looking at intestinal infections as well. But hopefully that helps to answer your question, so you can see that yes, there are some labs that we recommend, but a lot of this can be done with symptoms alone. All right, next up is Galia. Galia asks, do you use the newer IGeneX immunoblot testing for spirochete infections, Lyme, etc., or treat by symptoms, or both? So if we take a look back at that list again, you'll see that the Lyme type infections are clinical diagnoses. So even the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, say this, and yes, IGeneX is better than a regular Western blot. The DNA connections test is quite good, but they're all imperfect. It all depends on, is the infection present in the place where you're actually testing. So if you're testing in the blood and you're looking at the immune system's reaction to the bug, is the immune system functional? If the immune system's not functional, guess what? You're not going to get an accurate read. Okay. If you're looking in the blood and the infection is actually in the joints, guess what? You're not going to find the infection. So much of it has to do with the symptoms. And then when you start treating, if you're using treatments that are more specific to particular infections, you are going to know whether or not you're on the right path, because somebody's going to feel better or they're going to feel worse when you start killing infections. Okay, so we combine a couple of different things in order to be able to determine whether or not somebody has an infection. But most of the time, people are being underdiagnosed. It's not like people are getting a diagnosis of Lyme. Sometimes it's not being addressed appropriately, but it's usually people who have not had an appropriate diagnosis or have not assessed which causes or which infections they have. And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, people have 2 or more infections, where it's not just Borrelia. And sometimes it may look like just one infection. But then some of these other ones come out when you start treating. And I call this the whack-a-mole effect. But let's say you're going right at Borrelia, which I don't recommend starting off first. You want to do that later in the process. But let's say you're going right after Borrelia, and all of a sudden you start sweating like crazy. and you start having shortness of breath. Well, that's because Babesia popped out, because it's associated with those symptoms. So if we look at some of these symptoms, probably a good time to chat about this. If we look at some of these symptoms that you have, based off of your symptoms, you can determine which infection you have with some of these. And so if you look at Borrelia, you really can't have Borrelia, otherwise known as Lyme, if you don't have symptoms that come and go, where some days are worse than others, and you're hesitant to like schedule a good time or a date or a plan or an event with a friend or with your kids or whatever, because you don't know whether or not you're going to feel good on that day. And you also have to have symptoms that move around the body. So whether it's nerve pain, joint pain, or muscle pain that today, let's say, is in the shoulder, and then next week or next month or a couple of days from now is in the knee, that's how you know if you have Borrelia. There's very few things that actually do that. For Bartonella, which is found in upwards of 50% of all domestic animals, the symptoms that are associated with that are pain in the feet. Sometimes it's on the bottom of the feet. Sometimes it's just a tenderness on the bottom of the feet, where when you get out of bed in the morning, you're like, gosh, I really want to get my slippers on because my feet are really tender. Or if you're like, man, my feet hurt from being on my feet all day. Sometimes it is because you've been on them all day, but not everybody experiences that, right? There's muscle cramps, usually in the calves, usually at night. There can be muscle tightness as well. Muscle pain in the shoulders, back, neck, usually misdiagnosed as fibromyalgia. Oh, and the pain in the feet and the ankles, oftentimes misdiagnosed as plantar fasciitis. So if you have that, definitely consider looking at Bartonella. I do have a Bartonella quiz that is on the website at fixyourfatigue.com. And then there are other symptoms like hard time sleeping, whether it's falling asleep or staying asleep, anxiety, depression. Sometimes there are stretch marks or look like weight. You may have had some weight changes, but you're like, hey, I haven't had any weight changes. But those are Bartonella striae. And then oftentimes these people have thyroid issues, and they're cold all the time, cold hands, cold feet. Sometimes that's thyroid issues, but if you optimize your thyroid and you're still cold, then it's Bartonella. Okay. The last one I'll talk about is Babesia, where if you have spontaneous sweating and you have shortness of breath and you have awful sleep and you have anxiety to the point of panic attacks and depression to the point of suicidal thoughts, those can all be indicative of Babesia. And you don't have to have the sweating per se. And the sweating is usually cyclical. So maybe it's once a month, maybe it's every day, maybe it's every week. Oftentimes you're the hottest person in the room and you keep telling your friends, hey, turn up the AC. And they're like, what are you, crazy? Or you're outside shoveling snow because you're in your short sleeves and you're like, oh my gosh, I love this weather. Right. Sometimes, yes, it could be from menopause, but it is a bit of a different, it's more spontaneous sweating as opposed to kind of this gradual hot flash that you may get. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys. I digressed, but Galia, hopefully that answers your question. And then the last question that we have here that's been submitted, and I'm going to refresh this while I'm answering this question. So Beth asks, what are your thoughts on grass-fed raw dairy and traditionally prepared grains, such as long fermented organic sourdough bread? So it really depends on what your immune system is going to react to. For some people, this is okay. I mean, even with the grass-fed raw dairy, I don't think that any animals should be consuming milk past weaning, let alone another animal's milk past weaning, right? We are the only animal that consumes milk past weaning and that consumes some other animal's milk past weaning. So I don't believe that we're really made for dairy. I think if you ferment it, I think that it's more, the body's able to tolerate it better. But I just think, and if you are using different forms that like mimic breast milk better, then I think that can be supportive. So like if you're using goat or sheep, the ratio of the casein to the whey is going to be different and you can potentially tolerate it better. Or if you're looking at some of these new beta cows or their milk where you're not reacting to necessarily the alpha protein, like there are some variables on this, but in general, I don't believe that humans are really made for consuming dairy. Now, or at least consuming milk. With butter, it's very high in butyrate, which can be very healthy. But once again, it really, you have to test and see, how you react to things. The food elimination diet is really helpful, where you eliminate a food or multiple foods for 3 weeks, and then add the food back in, and one at a time, one every 4 days, and see how you react to it. It takes about 3 weeks for your immune system to get neutralized. And then you can go ahead and add it back in and see how you react. Have a dairy party, but do one dairy at a time. So have like a milk party, see how you do for 3 days, then have an ice cream party or a butter party, see how you do for 3 days. But that's kind of the way to test. The blood testing is okay. Once again, it's looking at the immune system's response. And if the immune system isn't functional because you've got all these toxicities, guess what? You're not going to get a good answer. Oftentimes people will also be more sensitive to foods when they start our program. And then once you get rid of a number of toxicities, immune system is less reactive. And then people are no longer having issues with so many foods, and you can eat what you want. Oftentimes it's also frequency. If you're eating dairy once a day, it's going to be different than once a week in terms of how your immune tolerates it. So it's different for everybody. And then in terms of long fermented organic sourdough bread, so if it is fermented and it's changing the gluten protein, it's very possible that you may be able to tolerate it, but it just depends on the person. Now we know that when you take a bite of gluten, it will cause the immune system to react and you cause inflammation for up to 6 months, right? So you just want to be careful about it and paying attention. Oftentimes you're not going to notice a difference. This is why in step 2, when we talk about replacing deficiencies, we don't really talk about changing your diet until you're half of the way or all the way through step 2. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that so many people who come to see us have done things. And if you're watching this or listening to it, you know that you've changed your diet several different times. You've done food elimination diets, been there, done that, and that you don't want to do it again right now. And the reason why is because, like I said before, when you have fatigue and low energy, you have 20 plus nails in the bottom of your foot, which each nail being a cause. But not all causes are weighed equally. The mold nail and let's say the Lyme or the Epstein Barr nail may be the fattest nails in the foot. And maybe the gluten nail and the dairy nail might be very thin and not really significant. So you pull dairy out, you pull gluten out, you don't notice a difference. What's Dr. H talking about? He doesn't know anything. I just removed these things and I don't notice a difference. Well, it's probably because you have so much inflammation going on in the body that it doesn't make a difference right now if you pull those out. Right? Your money, your time is best spent going after some of these other causes. So, but the reality is that you're going to be a lot more successful at getting rid of these other causes because it's cumulative in terms of the immune system's effect and its function. You're going to be a lot more successful when you have removed everything you possibly can from the immune system being overactive. Okay. So, okay, so hopefully that is helpful for you, Beth. Let me go ahead and refresh that, and I will take a look in the Facebook group as well. So I know somebody wanted to know about, let me just check something. Okay. So the mindset steps. Okay, so the first step, so mindset is incredibly important. So you can't get better just focusing on the physical. So there's a couple of things. So unfortunately, 99% of physicians out there, whether they're conventional, integrative, functional, or naturopaths, are not focusing on all the causes that they need to be focused on. And part of it has to do with the fact that you don't have to focus on all these things if you're treating the average person, right? You can really help people by just focusing on the deficiencies and some of the toxicities. Maybe you just look at heavy metals, or you just look at chemicals, or you just look at molds, or you just look at Lyme, but you're not looking at all these things. You have to look at all of them in order to be successful. And part of that is looking also at mental health. And this is not just, anxiety, depression, mental health diagnoses. This is your mindset. This is dealing with the 80% of your thoughts that are negative, right? You may not be aware of that. 80% of your thoughts are negative. So you have to reprogram the brain. And so that's what we do with our 4-step mindset process. The other thing that we do in our program, and we've got a mindset person on staff who helps lead people through this and other processes. The other thing we do is that with emotional health, we have a trauma coach on staff who helps people with their emotional health. Now, by using the word trauma, you may be like, oh, I don't have any trauma. But the new definition for trauma is anything less than nurturing. And we all have had trauma in our lives, whether it's rejection, whether it's from our parents. Parents are imperfect. I know I'm a parent. I'm doing the best job that I can, but I know that, I'm not perfect with my daughter, no matter how hard I try, right? And so it's really important to remember that our parents are all imperfect and they're all working out their own wounds, and hurt people, right? Their trauma ends up causing trauma on us. So we have to deal with that. And so we have somebody on staff who takes people through that in one-on-one and groups as well. That said, let's dive into the mindset. So the first step of the 4-step process is to practice gratitude. So in one Harvard study, 3 gratitudes a day decreased depression by 67%. And that's just one study. There have been numerous studies. And so I recommend that you say 3 gratitudes a day, and it can be the same gratitudes every day. It can be thank you for, like what I do. I always start off with thank you for my amazing wife, thank you for my amazing child, thank you for my amazing job, where I'm able to help people. And then I go off into and thank you for this and thank you for that. So it can be the same thing every day, but it puts you into a different state, and it starts the process of looking at things differently and looking around your life for things to be grateful for. Second thing is the body doesn't, and the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and fantasy or imagination. And so there have been a number of studies. One was East Germany athletes back in the 70s. With some sports, and then there was another one with piano players, and there's been others since, where basically if you envision practice, you are going to be as successful as you would if you actually practiced, except for the muscle memory of actually playing the piano or playing basketball. That's what it was. It was a basketball study. So really important. We recommend you go through your perfect 10 life. So what does your life look like if it were absolutely ideal? So you wake up in the morning, who are you next to? What does your house look like? Who's in your house? What do your relationships look like? You get out of bed, you do your breath work, you get in the sauna, you do your yoga. This is like my life, I'm telling you now. And then what does your day look like? You go for a walk, you start your day, you have breakfast, take a shower, you sing, you connect with your loved ones. What does work look like? What do your relationships look like? You go through your day, you feel great about your day, and then you go to sleep, right? So definitely envision that every single day, and the universe will conspire to create that. The next step is to look at any sort of limiting beliefs that you have. Maybe you are thinking on a subconscious level, I'm not enough, or there's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough love in the world for me, nobody loves me, like whatever it is that's not serving you, you want to flip it on its head and instead give yourself more empowering statements. And we take you through this whole process in the program, is to flip it on its head and think about things as the opposite. So there's always enough time, there's always enough money, the universe and everything is always working out for me. These are some of the things that you want to reprogram your brain with. The last step is to look at any sort of disempowering questions that you're asking yourself and flip them into empowering questions. So oftentimes there's one question that we're asking ourselves. And so this question would be in disservice, or wouldn't be serving us if we ask it, because the brain is a goal achieving machine. It's going to give us an answer to any question that we ask it. So if we ask it, why is this happening to me? Guess what? The brain is going to give us answers that we don't want to hear, right? Which aren't going to be supportive for us. But if we ask a better question, like, what can I do today to move my health forward? What can I do today to love myself even more? What can I do today to bring joy to a family member? right? So those are all much better questions because guess what? Your brain is going to give you answers that are going to be more supportive for you. So take some quiet time in meditation or prayer and think about what are these questions that you're actually asking yourself that are part of those 80% of negative thoughts. So hopefully that is helpful for you on that mindset. Give a thumbs up or say thank you if it was. So thanks for asking, Colleen. So then Katie asks, can we take the supplements with meds? You have a lot of meds. So you have to check with your doc on that. It's too general of a question for me to give you any sort of advice on that. Generally, yeah, it's just hard for me to give advice in this environment. And just a reminder, this is just based off of my experience. I am not your doctor. I am not providing you with any sort of medical advice. This is just based off of my experience and education and making recommendations. So I'm not diagnosing and treating anybody here. All right, great. So Colleen also said, so have Lyme disease always has been or has it evolved? Just curious. It's a great question. So all our moms dump all our good stuff and all our not so good stuff into their babies. We know now that in cord blood, so basically in the umbilical cord of babies coming out, there's around 300 different chemicals, there's toxins, there's infections, there's a whole bunch of things that are now coming out in the child. So yes, you may have it from day one, but then it's all of the environmental toxins that have built up throughout your life that end up putting you in the situation that you are now if you're not feeling well. So if you envision the human body as like this big rain barrel, you come out and you have some toxicity and then you just accumulate things over time. So for me, I ate a lot of gluten and dairy cereal and I was constipated where I would have a bowel movement once a week, which means that I couldn't get rid of the toxins out of my body. They would just get reabsorbed. And I was eating non-organic food because who knew about that in the 80s? And so a lot of pesticides and herbicides. And I grew up in New Jersey, so there were ticks and mosquitoes. And then I had mercury fillings and I ate a lot of tuna fish, which has a lot of mercury in it. And so all these things just began accumulating. And then I had some stress in terms of going to medical school and residency, and I lived in moldy places, and I ended up acquiring other infections by kissing people along the way, right? So all that stuff caused my chronic fatigue. And so then once again, we come down to those 20 causes that I have. I actually ended up having 30 of those, and I had to pull each nail out as I went through the process until I was done and feeling great. So with Lyme, it's very possible that you had it since day one, and that the more causes, the more toxins that you have that are hijacking the immune system, and then all of a sudden Lyme comes out to play and it becomes opportunistic and you get those Lyme symptoms. Or it could have been from a big inoculation from either you're intimate with somebody, or you got a tick bite, or you got a mosquito bite, or you got a blood transfusion, or basically anything that transferred blood or saliva or serous fluid from one person to another person. Okay. And then Elizabeth had asked an earlier question from Veronica. Right, overactive thyroid, had Graves' disease 2 years ago. You're in refit both, but how do I go about detoxing my body and my adrenals or whatever else to increase my energy? So so you had Graves' disease, you have overactive thyroid, it sounds like. So once again, like we talked about with autoimmunity, being the causes of autoimmunity are the same as the causes of your fatigue. So you got to go through the 4-step process to make sure that you're strong enough and that you have set the stage correctly to then remove the toxins, and then you can remove them. And essentially, you know, this process, if you break it down to something simple, it's kind of like figuring out the causes that you have and then matching them up with the treatment that you have, right? With the right treatment. And that's essentially what we're doing in the program. And we've got one-on-ones and groups in order to hold your hand and take you through that process. You're so welcome, Veronica. Hopefully you guys can learn from it. Let me just take a look and see. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Great. Well, I think that, and it's 4:53. we're doing really well. So if there's any other questions, I'll pause for a second and drink some water. Post them in the chat. But otherwise, we will adjourn in just a minute. So Veronica, do you have another question, or are you just giving me a thumbs up? Yes. Yeah, it's a tough one out there, just a living. It's true, like we're, our kids are supposed to be the first generation that don't outlive their parents, unfortunately, and that humans are just getting sicker. And we just have to be more aware. It's not all doom and gloom though, because we also have a lot more awakenings that are happening. I'm excited about stepping more into helping people with their mindset and their emotions, because we've been doing the physical and the toxins and removing those things, and it's really helpful. But we just see people who are investing the time and the energy into these other aspects to be even more successful. And I just interviewed Sonia Foss, the Oracle, on my podcast today, which will be coming out on Wednesday, which I highly recommend you guys take a look at, take a listen to. All about spiritual alignment, because that's another part of this, is that you have to be aligned, mind, body, spirit, emotions, and it's no longer just woo-woo. This is the real deal and how you're going to be so successful. Awesome. Thumbs up, Veronica. Deborah, good to see you again. Dennis, emotional code is great for helping remove trapped emotions. Yes. There's a number of different, we have a NARM practitioner on staff, which stands for Neuroaffective Relational Model for Trauma, who does wonderful work, but there's different ways of doing this. So thank you everybody for joining me. Hope this was helpful for you. If you are interested in going deeper on this and you're really tired of being sick and tired and you want to take your energy to the next level so you can lead your government, your family, your business, your friends, your communities, and take your life to the next level so that you can have more success and more fun. That's a big goal of mine this year, is to have more fun in every aspect of my life. If you're interested in doing that with us and you want to hang out with me more, come join our program. We'll drop the link below for you to schedule a free call with us to see if we're a good fit to work together, and to see if we can help you or not. If we can't help you, we'll send you someplace else. But if we feel like that we can help you and you want to know more about what we offer, we'll be happy to share with you our current program offerings. So be well. Many blessings. Bye now. I hope you learned something on today's podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends and family and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really helpful for getting this information out to more fatigued people who desperately need it. Sharing all the experts I know and love and the powerful tips I have on fatigue is one of my absolute favorite things to do. If you'd like more information, please sign up for my newsletter, where I share all important facts and information about fatigue, from the foods and supplements to the programs and products that I use personally and recommend to others so that they can live their best lives. Just go to fixyourfatigue.com/newsletter to sign up, and I will send you this great information. Thanks for being part of my community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. It is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. If you're looking for help with your fatigue, you can visit my website and work with us at fixyourfatigue.com. And remember, it's important that you have someone in your corner who is a credentialed healthcare professional to help you make changes. This is very important, especially when it comes to your health. Thanks for listening.